So I want to talk about this problem that I see, which is really endemic in so much of Christian apologetic dialogue about atheism and naturalism. The problem is that commonly atheism and naturalism are conflated or equated with one another, which is a very big problem because atheism is a claim about what does not exist. Naturalism is a claim about what does exist. Now, obviously, one could be both an atheist and a naturalist. But being one does not entail that you are the other. For example, you could be an atheist and reject naturalism. Thomas Nagel is a great example of this, one of the leading atheist philosophers in the world today, and also one of the leading critics of naturalism. But here perhaps is the more interesting one. You could be a naturalist, a professing naturalist, and reject atheism. Really, you could. What is naturalism? Well, naturalism can be defined different ways, right? It could be defined, as I said in my previous video, as generally the claim that all that exists is nature or natural in some way, under some definition. You could also be a naturalist while tying that in some respect to science in particular, and say, for example, that you believe that all that exists could be explained by hypothetically completed natural science. In other words, there are no non-scientific facts ultimately. If we understood comprehensively everything around us through science, we could understand it all with science. That's another way of thinking about naturalism. These are overlapping, still distinct interpretations or applications of the concept of naturalism. But with that in mind, you could be a naturalist of one or another sort and also have a concept of theism or have a concept of God. For example, in the sort of Spinoza or Einsteinian sense, you could understand nature to be all that exists, but in some way, nature is God. You could take a kind of pantheistic view, and I think it's fair to say that pantheism is a type of theism or a panentheistic view. In other words, understanding God in some way as arising out of nature and perhaps as an agent, even being able then to interact with nature. Think on this approach about the relationship between God and nature, all that exists, as somewhat like the soul and the body, that the soul emerges from the body, but or the mind could say, maybe that's less controversial, say the mind or consciousness arises from the body, agency arises from the organism, the material organism, and can act upon it. But certainly on many understandings of the mind body relationship, the mind could be viewed as not more than or distinct from the body, but perhaps an emergent property dependent upon the body or something like that, or identifiable with brain states or physical functions of the body. However, you want to cash that out. The point is, there could be a distinction, just as there is a distinction between the agent, the person, and their body, and yet the agent's not distinct from their body, certainly on this view. So God could be understood as some kind of emergent being within the universe that interacts with the universe, but is not beyond or more than the universe. I think you could describe, for example, different types of process theism along these lines. Now, I'm not here certainly to defend any one of these views, but there are people that hold views like this. And even more to the point, it's possible to hold a view like this, which means that you could be, yes, an atheist who rejects naturalism. You could also be a naturalist who rejects atheism. Now, of course, if you define God yourself as a being that transcends nature by definition and that is exists se or in it or his or their self or herself, and all other things that exist are contingent upon this being, well, then by that definition of God, you could not be a theist and a naturalist. But of course, there are many professing theists who don't accept this kind of very Greek view of God as existing as se and apart from nature, etc. So to conclude, what this means is that if you do confuse naturalism and atheism, that is an equivalent error to confusing theism and Christianity. If a person says, "Oh, I believe God exists," you don't then assume, "Oh, so you believe the doctrine of the Trinity and the doctrine of the incarnation," because that person could be a theist who doesn't accept the Trinity or the incarnation. They may be a Jewish theist, or they could be a Muslim theist, or they could be a deist, or they could be just some kind of minimal theist. They could be all sorts of different theists without accepting Christian doctrine. Similarly, you can't assume that just because a person says they're an atheist or a naturalist, that they are also that other thing, because they may not be. It's a real error and a problem because when we assume that people hold views that they may not necessarily hold, we are in danger of confusing the conversation, of alienating a particular dialogue partner, of failing to learn from them, potentially of straw manning what they actually hold. The best thing to do, rather than assume you know what people believe or what the entailments of their position are, is have a conversation with them, get to know them, and understand from their perspective what they believe.